Xtalks is the industry leader in connecting life science, food, healthcare, and medical device professionals. The Xtalks Life Science Podcast features insightful conversations with industry experts about all things pharma, biotech, and more.
Hello and welcome to the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. I'm Ayesha Rashid, Senior Life Science Journalist at Xtalks.com. And this week I am so happy to introduce our special guest for this week's show. We have with us today Elizabeth Jeffords, who is the CEO of Iolyx Therapeutics, which is a company developing targeted therapies to address inflammation in ocular disease. Elizabeth is a seasoned biotech leader with experience spanning company building, fundraising, clinical development, major product launches, and a more than $9 billion P&L. Before Iolyx, Elizabeth served as Chief Commercial and Strategy Officer at Alkahest and has also held leadership roles at Genentech and Roche. An angel investor with Portfolia, she serves on several boards, including Iolyx, Ashvattha, and Biotechnology Innovation Organization, or BIO. Elizabeth holds a Bachelor of Science in Biology and Management from Yale and a Master's of Business and Technology from UNSW, Australia, which she attended as a Fulbright Scholar. So to learn more about the work that Elizabeth is leading in the ocular disease space at Iolyx, let's turn to her now. Thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Thanks for having me, Ayesha. It's nice to chat.
Yes, looking forward to it. So Elizabeth, could you start off by telling us about Iolyx Therapeutics and what really inspired the company's focus on inflammation specifically in ocular disease?
Yeah, absolutely. So I spent a good chunk of my career at Genentech and Roche, and my last role there was running U.S. ophthalmology, and we were working on Lucentis and Vabysmo and Susvimo, and they were all anti-VEGF focused. And when I came out and worked for a smaller company, I really wanted to do something different. And so at Alkahest, we were working on an oral for AMD. And then when I came over to Iolyx after we sold Alkahest, I actually came because I talked to Dan Estes at Fraser Life Sciences, and he asked me, "What do you think we need in ophthalmology?" And I said, to be honest, and don't tell my old ex-colleagues, but I don't know that we need another anti-VEGF company. There's dozens of them, right? There's people working on various anti-VEGFs and TKIs, and it's wonderful, and I really think that there's going to be progress there for retina. But what isn't happening are companies that are focused on immunology and ophthalmology together. And so that's how we got started with Iolyx. And we really wanted to focus on diseases where you have an intersection of the inflammation that's going on in the body and what's happening with your eyes. And so the intent of it was really to sort of say, how can we look at immunomodulators or other I&I technologies, but bring them locally to the eyeball?
I love that. Thank you so much for that overview. And it really sets the stage for questions about, well, what differentiates the company from others in this space? And so it really drives home the point that there are so many other companies, in the VEGF arena, but to really target inflammation. I think that's more so of a novel approach, definitely. And so could you tell us about some of the indications, some of the diseases, and maybe walk us through some of the diseases where inflammation is really a core underlying, driver of pathophysiology.
Yeah, absolutely. This is where I get really excited about it. I'm going to get up my soapbox for a little bit, but we talk about inflammation and ocular disease all the time. Just by naming our indications, it should be obvious to you. So if I say that we're going to work on Sjogren's dry eye disease or thyroid eye disease or JIA-associated uveitis, right? Diabetic retinopathy. What's the common thread? It's autoimmune disease, right? And by nature, those are going to be things where you have cytokines flooding the body, sounding the alarm. And that happens in the eye too. But the problem is most of our drugs don't really get into the eye unless you put them there locally. So we figured, okay, well, if we focus on these autoimmune diseases and the ocular comorbidities, and we either get it locally with an eye drop or a retinal injection or anything else, then we could really do something different for patients. And that was the goal.
Yeah, I just love how you really, everything is so intuitive.
It's so obvious.
It's so obvious. Yeah. I know. I just think you just make it so obvious. Like you just lay it out so well, I would have to say. It's just like, oh, that is obvious. That makes so much sense.
I may have had some practice pitching
just
this.
a bit. Yeah, I know. Excellent. So awesome. And in terms of your approach, you mentioned that either you would be looking at getting your targeted therapeutics into the eye via injection or other methods. And so what are some of the approaches that Iolyx is taking? And in your opinion, what are sort of the most effective that you've seen so far?
Well, I mean, most ophthalmology companies either focus on what we call the front of the eye or the cornea, the ocular surface, the anterior compartment, or they focus on the back of the eye, and that's mostly retina. But you also look behind the retina for sort of the periocular environment, which is where TED tends to be a problem. We wanted to do all of them, and that it's a little bit strange for investors. Sometimes they're like, "Well, are you a retina company or are you a front of the eye company?" Because, by the way, retina is much cooler. But they're both cool because they both have patients that need help, right? So for front of the eye, you typically use an eye drop. That's the easiest way. You can do an injection into various things. You can put plugs into your intercanicular canals and all of that. But the easiest way and the way that patients like it the most is just a simple eye drop, especially if it doesn't hurt, right? And then for the retina, unfortunately, we're still focused really on a couple of things. One is intravitreal injections. So that is a needle that you use in the eyeball and you're getting it into the vitreous. Or then there are other ways even to get it further back into the retina, the choroid itself. But those are the easiest ways. And we're sort of wherever we can be straightforward, we're a straightforward company. So we go for eye drops and intravitreal injections wherever possible.
Great. Why complicate things, right? When we already have tried and tested
Well,
modalities.
Drug development. There's enough that's complicated. We don't need to add more.
Right. And then when talking about the mechanisms of action, MOAs, and all of that, what can you tell us about Iolyx's approach in terms of what kinds of mechanisms is the company targeting in various indications in various eye diseases with inflammation as a driver?
So when you look at that autoimmunity and inflammation as a driver, you're mainly looking at Th1 and Th17 and maybe a little bit of Th2 cytokines and sort of immune cell trafficking that goes with that. And so that's our main focus. Our first asset is a immunomodulator that hits Th1 and Th17. And that's really kind of important because a lot of compounds out there today either hit Th1, and the classic one there is steroids, or you hit Th17. And for dry eye, you see things like all of the cyclosporins and lifitegrast and products like that. And I think it's important that you hit both. It's a bit like cancer, right? We learned over time that you just can't go after cancer with one mechanism. You have to hit the cellular cascade and the growth drivers by multiple mechanisms. And so if we hit Th1, we hit Th17, you're more likely to dampen down that inflammation in the eye. And if the eye is in a less inflamed state, everything else works better. So for dry eye, these are people without a lot of tear volume, but they're also just a sort of the chronic inflammation, the pain, the redness, the upsetness of the eye that comes from that Th1 and Th17. And so we wanted to focus on dampening that down.
Once again, makes sense.
Yeah, the kind of, it's basically like the immune system is a good thing in many ways, but it's like a thermostat. If you turn it up too high, and that's what happens in the eye, it gets hot and uncomfortable. Now in cancer, of course, we're trying to turn it up. Maybe it's a little too cold.
Right.
But for the eye, for the most part, we're trying to turn that immune system down.
Right. Yeah, and to have that, I mean, in terms of when you talk about fine-tuning that thermostat, what are the approaches behind that? Is it a dosing thing, or are you looking at other targets as well? And then also, the second part of my question was going to be, are you looking at your pipeline as monotherapies or potentially in combination with existing therapies or other new therapies? Yeah.
Oh gosh, a couple of things there. I mean, one is that I think that this could be good combination therapy, just like oncology as well, right? I think maybe because I spent so many of my years working in breast cancer, I think like an oncology commercial person, but it can be a monotherapy as well. So something like dry eye, if you have a drug that targets the right inflammation and that gives you both efficacy and safety, that might be enough. For something like an inflammation in the retina where you also have vascular complications, maybe you'd want to do something that turns down the inflammation thermostat, but also repairs some of that exudation or the sort of mopping up of all the fluid and the exudate that comes out into the vitreous and into the retina. So I think it could be both. And we're agnostic on that. I think the mechanisms that we use will differ for the different diseases. So there might be some that are more tied to that just classic IL-17 and neutrophils and things like that. And there may be some that are more microglia, macrophage that we need to turn down from another perspective. And that just comes from as we think about our whole portfolio, we want to have different drugs that hit the right targets for the right disease.
And in terms of talking about the different diseases, of course, dry eye being really still a mainstay and a challenge in this space, a continuing challenge. So in terms of, we talk about unmet needs and all of that. So really, what are those unmet needs, and how is Iolyx coming at it? What is the approach really? Are you looking to, for example, in dry eye, you have companies targeting tear production, obviously efficacy in terms of targeting mechanisms, but also symptom relief and or both. And so what is the approach that you're taking at Iolyx in terms of addressing some of those unmet needs?
Now, I'm going to sound like a broken record with my comparisons, but in when I worked in breast cancer, when I started, I was working on Herceptin, and pre-Herceptin, we didn't talk about HER2 positive, CDK negative breast cancer, right? We just had breast cancer, or at the most, you had hormonal driven breast cancer and other, right? And now we have breast cancer subsegmented into so many different segments, and we're getting patients the things they need for their disease. I think you're absolutely right. So there are fantastic drugs like Mibo that is wonderful for making tear production. But if you don't have a lot of tears naturally because of your chronic autoimmune inflammation, it doesn't work as well in those patients. And so, just like even Tarsus has come out with a Demodex blepharitis drug, that's specifically if you have mites. That's great. That helps those patients. But what we don't have is something for the people that have autoimmune disease and this chronic just immune cell trafficking. And I always think of it as just like n- just always this sort of inflammation in the cells and just trafficking across the eye, and it makes these patients absolutely miserable. So when I think about the dry eye disease in autoimmune patients, I know they tend to present more severe. They're more female. They actually have more serious complications. Horrible things like corneal melts, and it's just as bad as it sounds. Perforations, neovascularization in the cornea, things like that happen more often in autoimmune patients than non-autoimmune patients. So we want to address those patients separately and differently with something that uniquely hits their disease. And I think what really gets me up my soapbox now is that these patients are often excluded from trials. And maybe it's because they're on autoimmune drugs that make them ineligible for a trial, or maybe it's just because they don't have enough tears. Maybe it's they're too severe, but they're excluded from these trials. And so when we did our phase 2 trial, we did a very simple Facebook ad looking for perimenopausal women with autoimmune diseases that had dry eye. And it was the floodgates were open, right? These women were coming out of the woodwork to saying, please, please let me into your trial. And by the way, I got to bring my mom and I have my friend. And, and it was just amazing the sort of that tells you the unmet need is there. And so when investors or even I was on the accelerator stage and this one thought leader said, well, dry eye is a commoditized disease, I get a little feisty because it's not. These people have horrible, horrible quality of life. Sometimes they stop working, right? Or they have depression. 16% of autoimmune dry eye patients have suicidal thoughts. from their dry eye. This is not a nonsense disease or a commoditized disease. We need something different. So our approach at Iolyx and the whole team is so focused on this. Get something for our moms. Get something for us, right? Make sure that we have a solution that works.
My goodness. I feel like, yeah, you just drove it home with that. I mean, because it's so true. When we think about dry eye disease, I mean, I wouldn't say commodified, but that is a perspective, I guess, from that end on the investor side. But yeah, it just seems like, okay, it's a very universal disease. A lot of people suffer from it. Maybe some eye drops will help, but you never hear about, yes, the different subsets, the different pathologies
Really
underlying, the disease, differ from patient to patient, how heterogeneous it could be. The same thing in oncology as it used to be back in the day. But now, yeah, profiling patients and really developing those personalized medicines by understanding the type of disease that patients have. So I don't think we hear that very often at all in the ocular disease space in general, I would say. And especially dry eye disease, because it's just lumped as this very big, disease that affects a lot of people, and that's about it. But thank you so much for putting.
It's coming, right? It's
coming.
Tearful and Ocular Surface Society has now started to talk more about precise medicines for the right therapies for the right patient, right? But we're not quite there yet because we just don't have enough drugs. We don't have the right set of things to help all the different patients.
Right. And do you also think that it's been because of a lag in, I wouldn't say a complete lack, but maybe a lag in or a gap in understanding of some of the drivers of the disease, for example, in patients who have autoimmune disorders versus not, and then other potential subsets and things like that as well?
I think that's very true. I think at some point we're going to pull this disease into segments itself, right? How can one patient that has autoimmune disease that's driving a chronic dryness and pain have the same problem as somebody who has meibomian glands that don't express, and so they can't let tears physically out of their meibomian glands? Those diseases are so different that we might end up with 5 or 6 different diseases at the end of it, because there's 40 million people in the U.S. with dry eye disease. That tells you that we probably haven't specified it enough.
Yeah, I can't imagine they're all the same.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And some people just need a little bit of, Visine or over-the-counter drops. And some people really need something different. I went to a patient summit held by the Dry Eye Foundation. Those stories were heart-wrenching. I mean, these are people living with a lot of pain and sensitivity, even just to imagine having your sort of air blowing on you. And that is excruciating for you. You can't even sit under your vent.
Yeah, it really puts into perspective. I think a lot maybe has also kind of been taken for granted in a way, because you have all these over-the-counter drops that you kind of think, I'll take care of it. But
cheap.
But people are really suffering. And I think, thank you so much for all of those perspectives. And I love the Facebook ad. Sometimes it's just the simplest things, right?
It's sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, that's a theme for us.
Simple and obvious. Clarity, right?
Clarity.
It's all about clarity. Yeah. No, that's so awesome. And in terms of just pivoting a bit, going back to your extensive experience in biopharma, biotech, as I understand, you've launched more than a dozen products across several therapeutic areas. You mentioned oncology, of course, through to the ocular space now. And so what lessons from those experiences shape your leadership at Iolyx and your development and commercialization strategies? I guess it's a lot, and I know you did touch on a bit. The investors
we all must be crazy to be in drug development, right? This is such a insane industry. You have drugs that fail at the very last second. I worked on lampalizumab for geographic atrophy. Beautiful phase 2, and then it failed in the phase 3, right? It happens, and so you could spend 10 years of your life working on something, and then it just doesn't work. But sometimes you get the win and the blessing and you get to help somebody, and that's what it's all for, and that's why we do it. And that's why we all stick with it. I've gotten to work on oncology and immunology and ophthalmology and rare disease and you name it. Genentech and Roche was an absolute blessing. And I got to work in the US and in Europe and was the CEO of Roche Norway. So I got to launch, I think it was like 5 or 6 drugs there: Gazyva, Kadcyla, Perjeta, Ocrevus, Hemlibra for I forgot. I mean, so much. I've had that such a blessing to work in all of these areas. And I think what I learned is no one drug launch is the same because the product has to be set up for success, right? So access is really important. But in the end, the one thing we always were taught at Genentech is you got to be FIC-BIC, which is first in class or best in class. And
Ah,
I think that's so
okay.
fair. Now, there are lots of people that do things that maybe aren't first, but are still maybe best, or things that are first, but not best. And then there's a lot of people that develop drugs that are not first and not best. And that's okay too. But for me, it has to be something that the patients need, right? If you are developing something first or you're developing something better, that is what makes a launch work. I think that we have all the tools in our armamentarium. We have patient copay cards and we have negotiations with sort of payers. We have marketing, we have sales. But at the end of the day, if you're making something that is safe and efficacious and does something like that, we always used to sort of quietly say, it starts to sell itself, right? Rituxan sells itself. It just really works. And so you have it in so many indications where it makes a difference for patients. That's the easiest thing about the launch. Now, I don't want to underplay the years and of work and millions of dollars that go into launching a drug. It's real, right? And then doing it in every single country in the world is an immense lift. One that I think we don't talk about in biotech enough is that how would a little biotech company like ours with 20 people involved launch something in Norway, let alone Germany or the UK? Sometimes we need help. Sometimes we need partners to do that, or we need to develop into larger companies. And you see Tarsus doing that, which is wonderful to see. But I think the launch process is about connecting to what people need and then bringing it forward. So it's a real blessing to have worked on so many launches. And to your point, having a P&L where I think I had 40 drugs in my basket. And these were all things that were all sorts of different seriousness of disease, all sorts of different types of patients, every walk of life, every country, right? Just an amazing opportunity to learn. But that is one of my philosophies. It just has to come back to the patient.
Yeah. I think that's definitely a very centering and grounding philosophy to have. And I think everything else follows as everyone, with any ounce of clarity and, focus on what they're doing, it always says that it, definitely centers around and comes back to the patient. And in terms of, I would say we talk about challenges, but the flip side to that usually is opportunity as well. So what opportunities/challenges do you see in the current landscape of drug development as you've journeyed through from Genentech to Roche to now, Iolyx, and also the differences between big pharma and smaller biotech companies as well. So how do the landscapes differ between? Those are 2 questions actually now. My apologies. So we'll tackle the first one in terms of just drug development in today's landscape, how it's changed, what are the challenges versus opportunities, I would say.
Challenges, maybe first. Money is tight. Money is still tight. It's been a rough couple of years. And what makes me the most sad is I've seen not just ourselves, we've doing a lot of fundraising, but others in the biotech CEO sisterhood, such a group of amazing women leading so many amazing companies. Multiple women in that group have successful, controlled phase 2 trials and are struggling to raise money. It's one thing if you're a preclinical platform company and you want to go public. Yeah, okay, maybe we need a correction on that. But but we have good data and we still can't get money to those companies. That to me is challenging. That is the survival of the fittest. And a lot of us just go to these meetings and we say, you know what? The success right now is just living to see another day. That's all you can do, right? Do what you do to see if you can live for another day, and or make the tough call and say, you know what, this isn't working, or the data wasn't good enough. We're going to wind it down and give the money back, right? So that's been the challenge. I think the wonderful sort of upside to where we are in this environment today is probably more due to the pandemic than anything, but the number of virtual companies, mine included, where we can have people from all over the country that are experts in their field, that love the patients, that love our development path, right? But work together. We have a team, we have a culture, we have jackets, right? But we still are in our own places, in our own home offices. And, we can work together and make something amazing. I don't think that we would have thought there'd be a lot of phase 2 and phase 3 ready companies that were completely virtual 5 years ago, certainly not 10 years ago. And that is an upside for drug development. So we're so much more nimble, and frankly, we're cheaper too, right? Because right now you have to be, but it also is good to save money and get to some quick answers and
Yeah,
say,
like
do we have
office
proof of
space
concept?
and all of the logistics around that. Yeah.
All that burn that you really don't need to spend.
Yeah, a lot of learnings indeed from the pandemic in terms of from styles of working through to clinical trial designs, as we've seen, right? Remote trials, decentralization, and just so much more happening across the board. So I think the pandemic has definitely taught us a lot for sure.
And it came at the right time, I guess, then.
I guess so. Timing is
Silver
everything,
lining.
right? Yeah. It's all about timing. And you mentioned being more nimble and the flexibility that a remote company or working remote offers. I would also imagine that working at a smaller company, leading a smaller biotech, that also offers more nimbleness as well compared to
absolutely
a larger pharma. And so how has the experience been transitioning from the big pharma side to more focused, I would say, biotech?
I think I did the perfect thing without even knowing that I was doing the perfect thing, which was learn everything you can at the big company, see it all, right? See the recalls, see the launches, see the development failures and the development wins, and find out what it takes to run those things.
Right.
And then go to a small company and figure out how to do it for about 10% of the cost. So I think they're both wonderful, but I love the nimbleness. Now, I do miss, I had teams of hundreds of people, right? That was really fun. And it was lovely to work with people on development and really lean into leadership. But you get to do that too with a small company. It's just a little bit more personal. So I prefer the small, but I also had a very natural segue between the two, because when I went to Europe, we just had much smaller teams in Europe than you do in the US, right? So I had, when I was running US ophthalmology, we had 70 people on my field team. When I was running US Roche Norway, I had 70 people in the whole organization, and that was covering everything from clinical trials to finance to safety to regulatory to everything. So it's just a different scale, but it also taught me A, that I could do it, and B, which one I like even more, is the smaller, more nimble organization.
That's great. Yeah, I think it seems like that transition was definitely a lot more natural because you were leading, smaller teams.
Like I said, I didn't mean for it to be.
You didn't mean for it to be, but it just happened. Yeah. So natural, organic, and
yes,
that's so awesome. And you're also active on various boards, investing, mentorship, which is so great to hear, because I really, for me, the role of mentorship and just finding good mentors and just being able to have that more personal interaction and just really being able to learn and lay out what you may want, and then have someone to not necessarily hold your hand and guide you, but really that mentorship is just so important in any field. And so can you speak to us a bit about that? And especially, of course, I don't want it to sound cliched or that, we're some specific subset, but women's leadership, that's of course a topic that always comes up. And so how do you see your role in supporting women's leadership in biotech and healthcare innovation?
I think I might have fallen into that as well too. I don't know that I started off to be this great women's leadership crusader, but I certainly ended up to be. Also, maybe because I started working on breast cancer and then I went into ophthalmology. And the little secret that we don't tell very many people is that most diseases in ophthalmology are actually women's health diseases, either because they come from inflammation, which is autoimmunity is going to be more female, or they come from age. And again, that's the people that are left is the women, right? So a lot of our work is for women's health. I work with the CEO Sisterhood. I work with HBA, the Healthcare Business Women's Association. I work with Springboard, which is a leadership accelerator for women-led companies in the U.S. and Australia, actually. And then Portfolia, I'm an investor in their femtech funds. I do that because I'm a woman and I love women, but like there's also just the need. And again, maybe it's that I'm just a sucker for places where people have unmet need and need champions. But I think it's also just this you have to be the patients you serve. And I think in my case, my pro bono work as well, you have to be the pro bono work that you're serving as well. Right. So the company leadership is largely women. And sometimes we'll get asked by an investor, someone, I can't tell you how many times people have said at a pitch meeting, they'll say, well, you're all women. We've never been to a pitch where it's all women. And I'll
Right.
say, well, we're serving almost all women. So we're not all women, but we're a lot of women because you should be the people that you serve. And I think then the same thing happens for me when I look at HBA and bio to some extent, but bio is obviously more sort of cross functional, cross demographic. But I also just want to help. I don't know. I'm just sort of a natural helper and a big believer in leaving the world a better place than you found it. And if I'm lucky enough to be able to work in this industry and lead in this industry, then I want to help others do it too.
I love that. And I think, as you mentioned, representing really the people that you're out to serve with that representation, I think it's so important because the understanding, the perspectives often are more intimately connected, and so that representation is so important for sure. And looking ahead, what excites you the most about the future of ocular drug development and also ocular diseases in terms of also bettering our understanding of these diseases and, like really furthering for example, really targeting the mechanisms behind the diseases, better understanding them, and then helping to, identify subsets of patients, stratify patients, and really build that ecosystem of patients that you'd like to really target and help. And so, what excites you the most? Sorry,
You just said
I'm just
all.
I've just said everything. I just talked too
that
much.
was my
I'm just so
answer.
excited about like all the possibilities.
I was like, yes.
You're like, yes, that and that too. Yeah. So really, what excites you the most? What are you looking forward to in the next couple of years about all of the stuff I mentioned? And more.
We're so excited to get our phase 3 running. We just want it. That's the ultimate test, right? If you can help people. So that is exciting for Iolyx right now. And then our platform and our portfolio as well. We're ready to advance that. So looking forward to having a little more money, a little more freedom to do that.
Sounds
It'll be
great.
And then I think, just sort of seeing hopefully the biotech industry turn around a little bit, maybe coming up out of that sort of 3-year doldrums. I would love to see that. I'd love to see the excitement and the practicality of it too. Just sort of saying, hey, we don't need to develop all things that are absolutely bleeding edge of science. We need some things that are bleeding edge of science, and we need some things that are just simple drugs. My CBO Heather Berger always says this: we could look at some C-ball, hit ball opportunities, right? And that's the way you get drugs to patients. So I don't know. I think there's so much to be excited for. And I think also even just watching women lead and exceed expectations this year, so many great M&A deals led by women. It was Sarah Boyce from Avidity, the latest, I think, but probably not even the latest because this week there's been even more. So I love seeing those deals happen and a little bit of like a hope and an optimism for the future of biotech.
Amazing. And thank you so much for being at the forefront of that yourself. Thank you so much once again for your time, Elizabeth, and for the absolutely incredible work that you're leading at Iolyx and your contributions and your vision for the space of ocular disease. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. It's been wonderful, and I really appreciate the chance to hop up on the soapbox and advocate for both women, but also for women with ocular disease and autoimmunity. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And we'll definitely be in touch and keep our eye out on Iolyx and all of the amazing work that you're leading, and looking forward to the developments and all of the updates.
Lovely. Thanks.
All right. That's the end of this episode of the Xtalks Life Science Podcast. If you liked today's show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you next week. Bye for now.
To join the Xtalks community, visit xtalks.com and register for exclusive access to curated content like live webinars, news articles, and educational videos. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers sharing them and should not be taken as professional advice, nor do they necessarily reflect the policy or position of Honeycomb Worldwide. For further information, email us at podcast@xtalks.com.